Welcome to my channel, and this is English Podcast.
So, we all have some behavior that we would like to change about ourselves. And we certainly all want to help someone else change their behavior in a positive way. So maybe it's your kid, your spouse, your colleague. So I want to share some new research with you that I think reveals something really important about what gets people to change their behavior. But before I do that, let's zoom in on one strategy that I think you probably use a lot. So let's say you're trying to stop yourself from snacking. What do you tell yourself? Well, most people's inner monologue will say, beware, you'll be fat. And if this was your kid, you would probably tell him that smoking kills, and by the way, he's in big, big trouble. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to scare ourselves and others into changing their behavior. And it's not just us. Warnings and threats are really common in health campaigns, in policy. It's because we all share this deep-rooted belief that if you threaten people, if fear is induced, it will get them to act. And it seems like a really reasonable assumption, except for the fact that the science shows that warnings have very limited impact on behavior. So, graphic images on cigarette packets, for example, do not deter smokers from smoking. And one study found that after looking at those images, quitting actually became a lower priority for smokers. So I'm not saying that warnings and threats never work, but what I'm saying is that on average, they seem to have a very limited impact, and so the question is why? Why are we resistant to warnings? Well, if you think about animals, when you induce fear in an animal, the most common response you will see is freezing or fleeing. Fighting, not as much. And so humans are the same. So something scares us, we tend to shut down, and we try to eliminate the negative feelings. So we might use rationalization. So for example, you might tell yourself, my grandpa smoked, he lived to be 90, so I have really good genes and absolutely nothing to worry about. And this process can actually make you feel more resilient than you did before, which is why warnings sometimes have this boomerang effect. And other times, we simply put our head in the ground. Take the stock market, for example. Do you know when people pull their head out of the ground to look at their accounts, not to make a transaction, just to log in to check their account? So what you're seeing here in black is the S&P 500 over 2 years. And in gray is a number of times that people logged into their account just to check. And this is data from Carlson, Lowenstein, and Seppi. It's controlled for all the obvious confound. So what do we see? So when the market is high, people log in all the time. Because positive information makes you feel good, so you seek it out. And when the market is low, people avoid logging in. Because negative information makes us feel bad, so we try to avoid it altogether. And all this is true as long as bad information can reasonably be avoided. So what you don't see here is what happened a few months later in the financial collapse of 2008 when the market went drastically down, and that's when people started logging in frantically. But it was a bit too late. So you can think about it like this. It's not just finance. In many different parts of our life, we have warning signs and bad behaviors now. And they could potentially lead to all these bad outcomes later. But not necessarily so, because there's different routes from your present to your future, right? It can go this way, it can go that way. And as time passes, you gather more and more information about where the wind is blowing. And at any point, you can intervene, and you could potentially change the outcome. But that takes energy, and you might tell yourself, well, what's the point about worrying about something that might happen? It might not happen. Until we reach this point, at which time you do jump into action, but sometimes it's a little bit too late. So we wanted to know in my lab, what type of information does leak into people? So we conducted an experiment where we asked approximately 100 people to estimate the likelihood of 80 different negative events that might happen to them in the future. So for example, I might ask you, what is the likelihood that you will suffer hearing loss in your future? And let's say you think it's about 50%. Then I give you the opinion of two different experts. So expert A tells you, for someone like you, I think it's only 40%. So they give you a rosier view of your future. Expert B says, for someone like you, I actually think it's about 60%. It's worse. So they give you a bleaker view of your future. What should you do? Well, you shouldn't change your beliefs, right? Wrong. What we find is that people tend to change their beliefs towards the more desirable opinion. In other words, people listen to the positive information. Now, this study was conducted on college students. So you might say, well, college students are delusional, right? We all know that. And surely as we grow older, we grow wiser. So we said, okay, let's test that. Does this really generalize? Does it generalize to your kid? Does it generalize to your parent? Does it generalize to your spouse? And so we tested people from the age of 10 until the age of 80. And the answer was yes. In all these age groups, people take in information they want to hear, like someone telling you you're more attractive than you thought, than information that they don't want to hear. And the ability to learn from good news, it remained quite stable throughout the lifespan. But the ability to learn from bad news, that changes as you age. So what we found was that kids and teenagers, they were the worst at learning from bad news. And the ability became better and better as people aged. But then, around the age of 40, around midlife, it started deteriorating again. So what this means is that the most vulnerable populations, kids and teenagers on the one hand, and the elderly on the other hand, they're the least likely to accurately learn from warnings. But what you can see here is that it doesn't matter what age you are. You can be 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60. Everyone takes in information they want to hear more than information that they don't. And so we end up with a view like this of ourselves. And our mistake as teachers, as mentors, as employers, is that instead of working with this positive image that people so effortfully maintain, we try and put a clear mirror in front of them. We tell them, the image is just going to get worse and worse and worse, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the brain will frantically try to distort the image using Photoshop and fancy lenses until it gets the image it's happy with. But what will happen if we went along with how our brain works and not against it? Take hand washing, for example. So we all know that hand washing is the #1 way to prevent the spread of disease, and this is really important in hospitals. So in a hospital here in the United States, a camera was installed to see how often medical staff do in fact sanitize their hands before and after entering a patient's room. Now, the medical staff, they knew a camera was installed. Nevertheless, only 1 in 10 washed their hands before and after entering a patient's room. But then an intervention was introduced, an electronic board that told the medical staff how well they were doing. Every time you washed your hands, the numbers went up on the screen. And it showed you your rate of your current shift and the rate of the weekly staff. And what happened? Boom. Compliance raised to 90%, which is absolutely amazing. And the research staff were amazed as well, and they made sure to replicate it in another division in the hospital. Again, the same results. So why does this intervention work so well? It works well because instead of using warnings about bad things that can happen in the future, like disease, it uses 3 principles that we know really drive your mind and your behavior. Let me explain. So the first one is social incentives. In the hospital study, the medical staff could see what other people are doing, right? They can see the rate of the shift, the rate of the week. We're social people. We really care what other people are doing. We want to do the same, and we want to do it better. This is an image from a study that we conducted led by PhD student Micah Adelson. And what it's showing you, it's a signal in the emotional center of your brain when you hear about the opinion of others. And what we found was that this signal can predict how likely you are to conform at a later time, how likely you are to change your behavior. So the British government are using this principle to get people to pay taxes on time. In an old letter that they sent to people who forgot to pay taxes on time, they simply stressed how important it was to pay taxes, and that didn't help. So then they added one sentence. And that sentence said, 9 out of 10 people in Britain pay their taxes on time. And that one sentence enhanced compliance within that group by 15%. And is thought to bring into the British government £5.6 billion. So highlighting what other people are doing is a really strong incentive. The other principle is immediate rewards. So every time the staff washed their hand, they could see the numbers go up in the board, and it made them feel good. And knowing that in advance made them do something that they otherwise may not want to do. Now, this works because we value immediate rewards, rewards that we can get now, more than rewards that we can get in the future. And people tend to think it's because we don't care about the future, but that's completely wrong. I mean, we all care about our future, right? We want to be happy, we want to be healthy in the future, we want to be successful. But the future is so far away. I mean, maybe you'll behave badly now, and you'll be fine in the future. And maybe you'll be altogether dead. So the here and now you would rather have that tangible drink, that tangible T-bone, rather than something that's uncertain in the future. If you think about it, it's not altogether irrational, right? You're choosing something sure now rather than something that's unsure in the future. But what will happen if you reward people now for doing actions that are good for them in the future? So studies show that giving people immediate rewards makes them more likely to quit smoking, more likely to start exercising, and this effect lasts for at least 6 months. Because not smoking becomes associated with a reward, and exercising becomes associated with a reward, and it becomes a habit. It becomes a lifestyle. So we can reward ourselves and others now for behaving in ways that are good for us in the future, and that's a way for us to bridge the temporal gap. And the third principle is progress monitoring. So the electronic boards focus the medical staff attention on improving their performance. This is an image from a study that we conducted that shows you brain activity suggestive of efficient coding of positive information about the future. And what we found was that the brain does a really good job at this, but it doesn't do such a good job at processing negative information about the future. So what does this mean? It means that if you're trying to get people's attention, you might want to highlight the progress, not the decline. So for example, if you take that kid with a cigarette, you might want to tell them, you know, if you stop smoking, you'll become better at sports. Highlight the progress, not the decline. Now, before I sum up, let me just share this small anecdote with you. So a few weeks ago, I got home and I found this bill on my fridge. And I was really surprised because there's never any bills on my fridge. So I was wondering why my husband decided to put that on our fridge. And so looking at the bill, I could see that what this bill was trying to do is get me to be more efficient with my electricity use. And how was it doing it? Social incentives, immediate rewards, and progress monitoring. Let me show you. So here's the social incentives. So in gray is the energy use, the average energy use of people in my neighborhood. And in blue is my energy use. And in green is the most efficient neighbor. And my reaction to this was, my immediate reaction was, I'm a little bit better than average. A tiny bit, but still. And my husband was exactly the same reaction. And I want to get to the green bar. And then I got a smiley face. That was my immediate reward. And it was telling me, you're doing good. And it made me want to put this on my fridge. And although I have this one smiley face, I can see there's an opportunity there to get two smiley faces. So there's an opportunity for progress. And it's showing me my progress throughout the year, how my energy use changes throughout the year. And the last thing this bill gave me, it gave me a sense of control. So it gave me a sense that I was in control of my use of electricity. And that is a really important thing if you're trying to get people to change their behavior, because the brain is constantly trying to seek ways to control its environment. It's one of the principles of what the brain is actually doing. And so giving people a sense of control is a really important motivator. Okay, so what am I not saying? I'm not saying that we do not need to communicate risks. And I'm not saying that there's one solution fits all. But I am saying that if we want to motivate change, we might want to rethink how we do it. Because fear, the fear of losing your health, the fear of losing money, induces inaction, while the thrill of a gain induces action. And so to change behavior in ourselves and in others, we may want to try these positive strategies rather than threats, which really capitalize on the human tendency to seek progress. Thank you.
Welcome to my channel, and this is English Podcast.
Well, I would like to start with testicles. Men who sleep 5 hours a night have significantly smaller testicles than those who sleep 7 hours or more. In addition, men who routinely sleep just 4 to 5 hours a night will have a level of testosterone which is that of someone 10 years their senior. So a lack of sleep will age a man by a decade in terms of that critical aspect of wellness. And we see equivalent impairments in female reproductive health caused by a lack of sleep. This is the best news that I have for you today. From this point, it may only get worse. Not only will I tell you about the wonderfully good things that happen when you get sleep, but the alarmingly bad things that happen when you don't get enough, both for your brain and for your body. Let me start with the brain and the functions of learning and memory. Because what we've discovered over the past 10 or so years is that you need sleep after learning to essentially hit the save button on those new memories so that you don't forget. But recently we discovered that you also need sleep before learning. And now to actually prepare your brain, almost like a dry sponge, ready to initially soak up new information. And without sleep, the memory circuits of the brain essentially become waterlogged, as it were, and you can't absorb new memories. So let me show you the data. Here in this study, we decided to test the hypothesis that pulling the all-nighter was a good idea. So we took a group of individuals and we assigned them to one of two experimental groups, a sleep group and a sleep deprivation group. Now the sleep group, they're going to get a full 8 hours of slumber. But the deprivation group, we're going to keep them awake in the laboratory under full supervision. There's no naps or caffeine, by the way, so it's miserable for everyone involved. And then the next day, we're going to place those participants inside an MRI scanner. And we're going to have them try and learn a whole list of new facts as we're taking snapshots of brain activity. And then we're going to test them to see how effective that learning has been. And that's what you're looking at here on the vertical axis. And when you put those two groups head to head, what you find is a quite significant 40% deficit in the ability of the brain to make new memories without sleep. I think this should be concerning considering what we know is happening to sleep in our education populations right now. In fact, to put that in context, it would be the difference in a child acing an exam versus failing it miserably, 40%. And we've gone on to discover what goes wrong within your brain to produce these types of learning disabilities. And there's a structure that sits on the left and the right side of your brain called the hippocampus. And you can think of the hippocampus almost like the informational inbox of your brain. It's very good at receiving new memory files and then holding on to them. And when you look at this structure in those people who'd had a full night of sleep, we saw lots of healthy learning-related activity. Yet in those people who were sleep-deprived, we actually couldn't find any significant signal whatsoever. So it's almost as though sleep deprivation had shut down your memory inbox, and any new incoming files, they were just being bounced. You couldn't effectively commit new experiences to memory. So that's the bad that can happen if I were to take sleep away from you. But let me just come back to that control group for a second. Do you remember those folks that got a full 8 hours of sleep? Well, we can ask a very different question. What is it about the physiological quality of your sleep when you do get it that restores and enhances your memory and learning ability each and every day? And by placing electrodes all over the head, what we've discovered is that there are big, powerful brainwaves that happen during the very deepest stages of sleep that have riding on top of them these spectacular bursts of electrical activity that we call sleep spindles. And it's the combined quality of these deep sleep brainwaves that acts like a file transfer mechanism at night, shifting memories from a short-term vulnerable reservoir to a more permanent long-term storage site within the brain, and therefore protecting them, making them safe. And it is important that we understand what, during sleep, actually transacts these memory benefits, because there are real medical and societal implications. And let me just tell you about one area that we've moved this work out into clinically, which is the context of aging and dementia. Because it's, of course, no secret that as we get older, our learning and memory abilities begin to fade and decline. But what we've also discovered is that a physiological signature of aging is that your sleep gets worse, especially that deep quality of sleep that I was just discussing. And only last year, we finally published evidence that these two things, they're not simply co-occurring, they are significantly interrelated. And it suggests that the disruption of deep sleep is an underappreciated factor that is contributing to cognitive decline or memory decline in aging, and most recently we've discovered in Alzheimer's disease as well. Now, I know this is remarkably depressing news. It's in the mail, it's coming at you, but there's a potential silver lining here. Unlike many of the other factors that we know are associated with aging, for example, changes in the physical structure of the brain, that's fiendishly difficult to treat. But that sleep is a missing piece in the explanatory puzzle of aging and Alzheimer's is exciting because we may be able to do something about it. And one way that we are approaching this at my sleep center is not by using sleeping pills, by the way. Unfortunately, they are blunt instruments that do not produce naturalistic sleep. Instead, we're actually developing a method based on this. It's called direct current brain stimulation. You insert a small amount of voltage into the brain, so small you typically don't feel it, but it has a measurable impact. Now, if you apply this stimulation during sleep in young, healthy adults, as if you're sort of singing in time with those deep sleep brainwaves, not only can you amplify the size of those deep sleep brainwaves, but in doing so, we can almost double the amount of memory benefit that you get from sleep. The question now is whether we can translate this same affordable, potentially portable piece of technology into older adults and those with dementia. Can we restore back some healthy quality of deep sleep? And in doing so, can we salvage aspects of their learning and memory function? That is my real hope now. That's one of our moonshot goals, as it were. So that's an example of sleep for your brain, but sleep is just as essential for your body. We've already spoken about sleep loss and your reproductive system. Or I could tell you about sleep loss and your cardiovascular system, and that all it takes is 1 hour. Because there is a global experiment performed on 1.6 billion people across 70 countries twice a year. And it's called daylight savings time. Now, in the spring, when we lose 1 hour of sleep, we see a subsequent 24% increase in heart attacks that following day. In the autumn, when we gain an hour of sleep, we see a 21% reduction in heart attacks. Isn't that incredible? And you see exactly the same profile for car crashes, road traffic accidents, even suicide rates. But as a deeper dive, I want to focus on this: sleep loss and your immune system. And here I'll introduce these delightful blue elements in the image. They are called natural killer cells. And you can think of natural killer cells almost like the Secret Service agents of your immune system. They are very good at identifying dangerous, unwanted elements and eliminating them. In fact, what they're doing here is destroying a cancerous tumor mass. So what you wish for is a virile set of these immune assassins at all times. And tragically, that's what you don't have if you're not sleeping enough. So here in this experiment, you're not going to have your sleep deprived for an entire night. You're simply going to have your sleep restricted to 4 hours for one single night. And then we're going to look to see what's the percent reduction in immune cell activity that you suffer. And it's not small. It's not 10%. It's not 20%. There was a 70% drop in natural killer cell activity. That's a concerning state of immune deficiency. And you can perhaps understand why we're now finding significant links between short sleep duration and your risk for the development of numerous forms of cancer. Currently, that list includes cancer of the bowel, cancer of the prostate, and cancer of the breast. In fact, the link between a lack of sleep and cancer is now so strong that the World Health Organization has classified any form of nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen because of a disruption of your sleep-wake rhythm. So you may have heard of that old maxim that you can sleep when you're dead. Well, I'm being quite serious now. It is mortally unwise advice. We know this from epidemiological studies across millions of individuals. There's a simple truth. The shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. Short sleep predicts all-cause mortality. And if increasing your risk for the development of cancer or even Alzheimer's disease were not sufficiently disquieting, we have since discovered that a lack of sleep will even erode the very fabric of biological life itself, your DNA genetic code. So here in this study, they took a group of healthy adults and they limited them to 6 hours of sleep a night for 1 week. And then they measured the change in their gene activity profile relative to when those same individuals were getting a full 8 hours of sleep a night. And there were two critical findings. First, a sizable and significant 711 genes were distorted in their activity, caused by a lack of sleep. The second result was that about half of those genes were actually increased in their activity, the other half were decreased. Now, those genes that were switched off by a lack of sleep were genes associated with your immune system. So once again, you can see that immune deficiency. In contrast, those genes that were actually upregulated or increased by way of a lack of sleep were genes associated with the promotion of tumors, genes associated with long-term chronic inflammation within the body, and genes associated with stress and, as a consequence, cardiovascular disease. There is simply no aspect of your wellness that can retreat at the sign of sleep deprivation and get away unscathed. It's rather like a broken water pipe in your home. Sleep loss will leak down into every nook and cranny of your physiology. Even tampering with the very DNA nucleic alphabet that spells out your daily health narrative. And at this point, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, how do I start to get better sleep? What are your tips for good sleep? Well, beyond avoiding the damaging and harmful impact of alcohol and caffeine on sleep, and if you're struggling with sleep at night, avoiding naps during the day, I have two pieces of advice for you. The first is regularity. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. No matter whether it's the weekday or the weekend, regularity is king, and it will anchor your sleep and improve the quantity and the quality of that sleep. The second is keep it cool. Your body needs to drop its core temperature by about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate sleep and then to stay asleep. And it's the reason you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot. So aim for a bedroom temperature of around 65 degrees or about 18 degrees Celsius. That's going to be optimal for the sleep of most people. And then finally, in taking a step back, then, what is the mission-critical statement here? Well, I think it may be this. Sleep, unfortunately, is not an optional lifestyle luxury. Sleep is a non-negotiable biological necessity. It is your life support system, and it is Mother Nature's best effort yet at immortality. And the decimation of sleep throughout industrialized nations is having a catastrophic impact on our health, our wellness, even the safety and the education of our children. It's a silent sleep loss epidemic, and it is fast becoming one of the greatest public health challenges that we face in the 21st century. I believe it is now time for us to reclaim our right to a full night of sleep, and without embarrassment or that unfortunate stigma of laziness. And in doing so, we can be reunited with the most powerful elixir of life, the Swiss Army knife of health, as it were. And with that soapbox rant over, I will simply say good night, good luck, and above all, I do hope you sleep well. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No. Stay there for a second. Good job not running away, though. I appreciate that. So that was terrifying.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Since we can't catch up on sleep, what are we supposed to do? What do we do when we're like tossing and turning in bed late at night or doing shift work or whatever else?
So you're right, we can't catch up on sleep. Sleep is not like the bank. You can't accumulate a debt and then hope to pay it off at a later point in time. I should also note the reason that it's so catastrophic, that our health deteriorates so quickly, first is because human beings are the only species that deliberately deprive themselves of sleep for no apparent reason.
Because we're smart.
And I make that point because what it means is that Mother Nature, throughout the course of evolution, has never had to face the challenge of this thing called sleep deprivation. So she's never developed a safety net. And that's why when you undersleep, things just sort of implode so quickly, both within the brain and the body. So you just have to prioritize.
Okay. So, but tossing and turning in bed, what do I do?
So if you are staying in bed awake for too long, you should get out of bed and go to a different room and do something different. The reason is because your brain will very quickly associate your bedroom with the place of wakefulness. And you need to break that association. So only return to bed when you are sleepy, and that way you will relearn the association that you once had, which is your bed is the place of sleep. So the analogy would be, you'd never sit at the dinner table waiting to get hungry. So why would you lie in bed waiting to get sleepy?